Okay, right. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We are talking today about integrating mediation skills into a computer-based speaking test. First, an overview of today's presentation. We'll begin by discussing the context of the study, particularly why we decided to assess mediation. Then we'll look into how mediation is defined and show you one of the tasks we developed to assess this construct. We'll look at the research questions we had and the methodology we used, and take you through the results and the findings. I'm not sure how much time we'll have with questions, but we're more than happy to answer any by email or by chat during this conference if you can find us. So, the context of our study really was to expand the computer-based speaking construct. We were looking into eliciting high-level speaking production, specifically at C1 and C2 levels, and we found that our existing task types weren't providing the scope needed for these levels. We felt that we needed integrated skills, especially as we were limited to monologic performances without human interlocutors to develop the discussion. Essentially, we want to see what was possible when you have a single candidate interacting with written and recorded input. We also wanted to ensure we were very clear about what it was that we were testing. As well as linguistic ability, we needed to define the high-level skills and competences crucial to higher-level proficiency. So overall, we felt this was a perfect opportunity to explore the mediation construct, which was outlined in the most recently published companion volume to the CFR. So what's interesting is that we developed these tasks in 2019, not knowing how much more relevant they would become shortly after that. And in fact, when we look at these definitions from the companion volume that you can see here, it's clear that the skill of mediation is one that's been needed and put into action a huge amount over the past year. Direct communication has been a challenge, and learners all around the world have found themselves needing to speak online in a variety of contexts, navigating a range of difficulties, making themselves heard and understood. We actually developed a few different tasks for this project, but because of time, we'll just look at one of these today, which I'll be referring to as the recommendation task. Essentially, it requires a candidate to listen to a friend or a colleague's request and read multiple pieces of information presented in various modes. The specific mediation subskills from the CFR which are relevant here are those of mediating text and data in speech, whilst using both receptive and productive skills. So here's an example of the task type which we developed as seen by the candidates. First, they see and hear the rubric that you can see in the dark green box. They're told that they have received a voicemail and some information from a friend who needs their help to decide about something. They have to listen to the voicemail and then look at some visual information. They have 1 minute to look and read, and then 90 seconds to speak and provide a recommendation to their friend. So for this example, the friend is wondering whether they should take a specific computer programming course. They provide some relevant details. They want to prepare themselves for a career as a data scientist, and they outline some key requirements. So for example here, they understand all the basics and they have a busy schedule. They're then shown the visual input, which is information about the programming course. The visual input is organized in 3 sections, and what you can see here is the overview. It contains a lot of information, some of which is directly relevant to the friend's requirements. Here, for example, the course length, some key requirements, and some which isn't. The next set of information is metrics about the course, which includes some data being presented, such as the overall rating for the course, student satisfaction in specific areas, some percentages, and again, some of the information directly relates to the friend's requirements. The last section, which we think is the most interesting, contains some comments from past students. So this is intended to emulate the kind of information which candidates might see on a regular basis in the real world, on the internet, for example, on review sites. And we think they're interesting because they can provide the candidate with some conflicting information. Here, for example, one of the comments mentions that the class is easy, but another one says you're likely to fall behind if you don't put in the hours. These are subjective opinions, so the candidate needs to read through them to get a full picture of the course and therefore be able to respond to the prompt effectively. We thought it was really important for this task that we explicitly communicate to examiners and students what task achievement meant in order to standardize marking. So we defined it using what we call functional competency descriptors. To successfully achieve the task, candidates have to relate their recommendation to the requirements, which were outlined in the audio input, so that's the voicemail, as well as link ideas from across the visual input. So putting, for example, the comments in contrast with the metrics to either confirm or contradict one of the subjective opinions. They also have to use an appropriate register. As we try to provide a relatively authentic scenario, we felt this was important. This, combined with their linguistic performance, leads to a final score. It's important to note that there's no right answer to this task. Candidates are free to either recommend the course or not. As long as they fulfill the descriptors you can see here, we consider the task achieved. So the research questions which we had for this study were, what are the test takers' perceptions of the task, whether the task elicited the mediation behaviors we were hoping for, and whether the task could successfully distinguish candidate levels between B1, B2, C1, and C2 levels. In terms of methodology, overall we had 340 participants from 2 stages of trialing. They had a range of proficiency levels between B1 and C2, as well as a range of L1s, and importantly, none of them had any knowledge of the task types prior to the trial. In the first stage of the trial, we observed and interviewed 31 participants, which formed the basis of our thematic and discourse analyses, and we used Inoue to analyze all 340 participants' scores. So, the first research question, what did the test takers think of the task? We identified 3 major themes from the interviews. The first theme had to do with the authenticity of the test construct. A number of participants commented on this, and one of them, for example, said, I have lots of experience evaluating this kind of information and you can't say anything wrong because it's your opinion about it. The second major theme which we saw across the interviews was that participants felt the cognitive load was quite heavy. One said, there's so much information, I chose not to talk about the information I could read, but about my experience because that was easier. On the more positive side, though, we got some feedback that most participants actually enjoyed the task. And this one said, I enjoyed finding which information was important and that I could match the needs, like a puzzle. So overall, we found that the test takers thought the task represented real-life scenarios. And they did find it cognitively demanding, which is something we expected. Participants aren't likely to have encountered this type of task in a testing situation before. But despite that, they still found the task engaging, which is great news. And now I'll pass over to Jing, who'll take you through the next research questions.
Thank you, Annabelle. Our second research question is, does the recommendation task elicit mediation behaviors? This is a matter of construct validation as to if the task assesses the construct that we intend to measure. Next slide, please. As Annabelle mentioned, we conducted discourse analysis on participants' responses to the recommendation task. Due to the time constraint, I will only show a partial transcript of response produced by C2 participant. As seen in the first paragraph, the participant starts with her recommendation, saying that a few things about the course might not work well for you, implying that the course is not recommended. In the second paragraph, she goes on to elaborate her judgment by synthesizing information from the course description and the voice message she received. She saw a conflict between a requirement to attend every single class and her friend's busy schedule. In the third paragraph, she changed the topic and discussed her evaluation on the student feedback on the course. She saw some mixed reviews on the instructor. In the last paragraph, she presents a more accurate picture to her friend, linking and paraphrasing ideas from different sources within the student feedback. That is, previous students of the course had different views on how good and helpful the instructor is. Next slide, please. Annabelle. So in response to the question, does the task elicit mediation behaviors? Throughout the participants' responses, we saw a range of language functions being elicited, including specific information being relayed, language being paraphrased, adapted, information from multiple sources being synthesized, and information being analyzed and evaluated. In short, mediation behaviors were elicited by this task. Next slide, please. Yeah. Our third research question is about the differentiation power of the recommendation task. That is, can this task effectively distinguish among B1, B2, C1, and C2 speakers? This figure shows the distribution of recommendation task scores across 4 proficiency groups. It can be seen that C2 speakers perform most consistently on this task, within the smallest spread of scores, and the B1 speakers perform least consistently, with the largest spread of scores. Some of the B1 speakers even fell below the B1 cut score, indicating this is a very difficult task to them. You can see the upward trend of performances from B1 to C2, which meets our expectation. We performed one-way between subjects ANOVA on the task performance as a function of oral proficiency levels. ANOVA and the post-hoc Scheffé test suggested that each proficiency group exhibited significantly different levels of performance except between C1 and C2 groups. On the right side of the figure, you may see the mean differences between each group. The mean difference between C1 and C2 speakers was 0.37, which is the smallest and not significant. Next slide, please. This is a mean plot of each group's test scores on the recommendation task. In this plot, you can again see the upward trend of speakers' performance as oral proficiency increases. And you can also spot a difference between C1 and C2 speakers, which is, however, not significant according to the p-value. We speculate that this lack of significance could be attributed to the small number of C2 participants in this sample. A quick sum up for the research question 3 finding is that participants tend to perform better on the recommendation task if their oral proficiency is higher. There were significant differences in task performance among B1, B2, and C-level speakers, but no difference was found between C1 and C2 speakers, possibly because C2 speakers were underrepresented in the study. Now I will have a quick discussion of the findings of this study. First, we found that mediation behaviors were successfully elicited by a computer-based speaking task, which is good news. Such behaviors include relaying information, paraphrasing information, synthesizing information, and evaluating information. But we must admit that there's no assessment of interactional mediation, such as checking listeners' comprehension and adapting language and content based on the listeners' reactions. On the other hand, oral mediation seems an authentic construct based on the participants' feedback. Indeed, all of us are exposed to a vast amount of information in this digital world and are required to select, evaluate, and link the received information for oral production. Second, we found that we can distinguish mediation performances among B1, B2, and C-level speakers, but not between C1 and C2 speakers. At this point, we are not certain about what prevented C2 speakers from outperforming C1 speakers. It could simply be due to the sampling constraint. Finally, we'd like to point out that a number of contextual variables associated with the input material may have an impact on learners' oral mediation performance. These include the level of input language, the way the multimodal information is presented to the speakers, and the interconnections among the various sources of input. Finally, we would like to conclude our presentation with a quote from Enrica Picardo, Brian North, and their colleagues. Mediation takes a crucial role with its capacity to enable and support the user/learner as a social agent in their development processes. Mediation usually involves reception and production, and often interaction. Assessing oral mediation skills via computer-based speaking tasks may not be an easy job, but we have just taken a few baby steps. Now we're going to open the floor for questions. In case we are not able to answer all of the questions, our contact information is listed below. Okay, I assume we'll be receiving questions in the chat, right?
Hi, Jing. We've actually got a question about how was the scoring reliability / consistency for the task.
Okay. Are you talking about score reliability?
I'm guessing amongst the
Yep. Yeah, we didn't get time to kind of look at iterator reliability. And actually, as Annabelle said, we came up with a new mark scheme which take into consideration functional competency. And actually, the reliability between raters are pretty high on this particular task. It's over 0.9, but I don't remember the exact number. Does that answer your question? So this task is actually marked or rated by examiners who are trained using a particular mark scheme that Annabelle talked about.
I think I'll just answer one more question, which was a lot about the marking, which is, of course, really interesting, and I wish we had more time to talk about it. But there's a question about rubrics being used for assessing task performance, and I think it's important to note that the rubric really reflected the functional competency descriptors that I mentioned before. What we're asking the candidates to do is what we're defining as task achievement for the examiners. And that's key. As for the mark scheme, it was a variation of the mark scheme which is currently used for linguaskill speaking, which is CFR level based. So it's a multi-level mark scheme which goes from A1 to C2, although obviously at this level, people were concentrating more on the B2 to C2 levels. And I think that's time.
Yeah, we're happy to receive more questions through email. You can look us up on Cambridge English's website. There should be contact information listed on that. We're happy to reply, kind of respond to your question via email later.
Yeah, and again, by chat if you see us in the conference, which I'll certainly be in for the rest of the day. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And